Hey everybody, so here is my video attempting to explain what log color space is. Now there's people out there whose job it is to think about color and color space and how color gets recorded on cameras and films and how color is displayed on monitors, and those people are called color scientists. And a color scientist would probably cringe at my explanation, but when I worked in Philadelphia, I worked with a great engineer who explained a lot of this stuff to me. And when I had questions about it, he said, "Look, I'm going to explain this to you so even an editor could understand." I miss working with that guy. I really do. The point is, this might not be 100% technically correct. What I'm trying to do here is kind of explain to you the theory and the idea behind it. So let's look at this graph. This curve is a representation of how the color is being recorded on your camera. So what is Rec 709? Rec 709 is a recommended color space. I'm not sure what the 709 means. Engineers designed it, so it probably has something to do with all the math added up and it came out to 709. Not sure, don't care. Rec 709 is the color space that your monitors display. Rec 709 is the color space all of your video cameras record in. It's what your iPhone records in. It's what your studio cameras record in. It's what your security cameras record in. It's how that color is represented. Now this linear line represents Rec 709 color space. What's that, angry color scientist? It's not exactly a Rec 709 curve? Yes, correct. Technically, a Rec 709 curve would look a little bit like this, and then your monitor has a LUT on it, which means the monitor has a curve on it like this. So when you look at that color on your monitor, it's a nice linear line. So this is a graphical representation of a Rec 709 curve. This quote unquote looks normal. This is a kind of a what you see is what you get curve. Now the numbers on here don't really mean anything. I just put them on there to help illustrate my point. I guess technically they should go from 0 to 1024 if you're in 10-bit, and it would be, I think, 0 to 255 if you're in 8-bit, but I'm not going to get into bit depth. This is just really so you can understand what's going on. So when you record with your video camera, for all intents and purposes, you get a nice linear gamma curve like this. So let's just say, to pick out a number, we'll put it right here and we'll say this spot here on the graph, 60 and 60, that number represents the color red. It's a certain shade of red. What is it? Don't care. It's just red. So when I come in here and I start color correcting in Resolve or another color correction software, when I move that point, I go from 60 to 61 to 62 to 63 as I increase my y-axis on this curve. Now, this is what log does. When a log curve is applied, this is what it looks like. It's way up here. So what does this mean? It means our colors are being remapped to different XY values on this grid. But who cares? Well, you should care, because this is how we get different colors. So in our previous example in Rec 709, that shade of red was recorded at, let's just say, and these are arbitrary numbers to just illustrate my point, it's at 60 and 60. But that same shade of red, when it's recorded in log, would be, I don't know, 90 and 30. So that color red is up there. So when you play this logarithmic recorded footage back and you're looking at it on a monitor, it looks washed out. Why? Because your monitor is calibrated for Rec 709. So your monitor wants a gamma curve that looks something like this, slightly bent. But log footage has a curve that looks like this. So your monitor cannot properly display this curve correctly. So I went to a seminar at Rural Camera in Boston where they really went into this stuff. And this part kind of blew my mind. These colors are recorded correctly, meaning they look, quote unquote, normal. Here's the mind-blowing part. The monitor technology that is required to look at these log curves natively, meaning looking at this footage natively straight out of the camera and having it look right, the technology doesn't exist yet. You can't look at these colors natively. So this is our camera that we record the log footage with, the Sony FS7, and it is recording so much color you can't correctly see it natively out of the camera. Which of course begs the question, if you can't see these colors normally, why would you want to record them this way? I'll get to that in a minute. Here's how we look at the colors normally. We apply something called a LUT. The LUT is basically that log curve inverted. It's the opposite of that log curve. So when you apply that LUT to logarithmic footage, it bends the curve back so it's a nice linear curve. and the footage, quote unquote, looks right. Confusing? Yes. But if we look at this graph, and I'm going to try to explain to you what's going on in a practical sense. Our color red here in Rec 709 is at 60 and 60. On this graph, the log curve bends it to 90 and 30. So when we apply a LUT to this footage, the LUT looks something like this. It's the inverse of our curve. So when we apply a LUT that has a curve like this to our log footage that looks like this, it ends up doing this. It makes that curve linear, and it looks normal. But here's the cool part. That data normally lives at point 60 and 60, but it's being recorded at point 90 and 30. So let's say I color correct this footage, and I manually bend it back, and I make it look right. So that point, instead of being at 90 and 30, is now at 60 and 60. When I start to adjust that color, I don't have to go to 60 to 61. I can go 60.1, 60.2, 60.3. Why? Because I have information that was recorded up here and is being bent back all the way to here. I have this massive amount of color in between 90 and 60. There's a lot more color in there because it's being recorded on this curve. Again, these numbers don't really, quote unquote, mean anything. They're just numbers in the graph to help illustrate my point. So when you move this curve from 90 and 30 to 60 and 60, where it's supposed to be, you've got 30 extra units of color. So when you start to move this curve around, when you start to push the colors around in your color correction software, there is a lot more data there. There's a lot more information there because it's been recorded on a log curve. Confusing? Yes. Think of it this way. I've got a 12-foot long bar of color, and I only have a 4-foot bag. How am I going to fit it in there? I can't fit that bar in there linearly. It's not going to fit. If I take that color and I bend it into a curve, then I can get 12 feet of color into a 4-foot bag. Okay, so you now know why I color correct and do editorial and not graphic arts. Enough of my pathetic graphics. Let's take a look at some actual log footage. This footage was shot, I think it's a Sony FS55 or 65. It's the big brother of the FS7. It was shot with a Cinema Prime lens. I believe it was a Zeiss Cinema Prime. If you can ever shoot with a Cinema Prime lens, I recommend you do it. The footage looks amazing. And it was shot on Sony S-Log3. First, let's take a look at the scopes. You can see this footage. None of the blacks were crushed, and none of the whites are blown out. Even this light right here, which is this right here, that's not clipped, that's not crushed. There's detail in that light, believe it or not. So in the Resolve, you can add LUTs to footage, and this is how you do it. You right-click on a node and put 3D LUT. Now, these are all the different kind of LUTs the Resolve comes with. You can load more LUTs if you have your custom LUTs or a camera that's not listed. But I talked to the DP before we shot this stuff, and he told me to use Sony S-Log3 Gamma 3, Cine 2 C709 Type A. That's the LUT he recommended using, and I click that on, and you can see our shot is now on planet Earth. If we look at the scopes, none of the whites are clipped, and none of the blacks are crushed. But this shot looks a lot better, because this LUT, this little checker bar here means LUT, is bending those curves back where they should be. I'm going to turn this LUT off, and we're going to go down here, and we're going to take a look at the curves. This should look a little familiar. I'm going to drag my blacks down, and I'm going to bring my highlights and midtones up. And as you can see, that shot is now looking a little bit better. I can adjust my midtones a bit too. Now, a lot of log curves will be called S-Log, and this is why. So this shot was recorded logarithmically, and the log curve, if you could see it, probably looked something like this. Okay? All I've done is come in here, I've inverted that curve. Like I did on my hacky graphics, I've made some curves, and I've bent them around. This is why when you shoot log footage, you want to come in here and adjust your curves. Because in a sense, that's what log is doing. It's putting your footage on a different curve. And by manipulating these curves, you can bring them back. Now, I'm going to reset this. And I'd mentioned in an earlier video why I don't like LUTs. And this is why. LUTs are for wimps. Let's bring the gain up on this shot. Notice the relationship between this blue line and this yellow line. The blue line is at 1023. The yellow line is at 896. When I bring that down, that relationship is still there. It's moved linearly, meaning the relationship from 1023 to 896 is pretty much the same as the relationship between 896 and 768. This means I have lots of color range. As I make my picture brighter, my colors really aren't being affected because there's so much color information in that log curve. And watch what happens if I bring it down to 768. The yellow and the white curve are getting closer to the blue curve, but they've hardly moved at all. So this relationship between these two peaks is a linear one as I increase the gain and as I decrease the gain. I'm going to reset this, add another node, and I'm going to add a LUT onto this node. There's my LUT. Watch this spike. Watch this relationship as I move it up. See how it's getting a lot closer, a lot faster? This is because the LUT is remapping those colors. It's limiting my color range. Watch what happens to this relationship when I bring the gamma down. It's a lot different. These colors are no longer acting linearly, meaning the relationship between the colors is changing as they make the picture brighter or darker. A colorist will call this working underneath the LUT. So I've got the LUT here, it's my last node, and I'm color correcting underneath it. Now, I still have all my logarithmic information in this node, but because I have a LUT on the output on the very last node, the LUT is limiting me. The LUT is kind of restricting me. I find myself fighting against the LUT. Watch what happens when I bring the lift up and down. The bottom sinks a lot faster than the midtones and the highlights. I'm going to bypass this node. Watch what happens when I bring the lift up and down, not using a LUT. It's more of a linear relationship. If I turn this LUT on, does it move the same? Personally, I find LUTs limiting. I don't like using them. But that doesn't mean LUTs are useless or bad. There's all kinds of uses for LUTs, and they do come in handy. I just find that when I'm trying to give a spot a real look, the LUT kind of gets in my way. If you're first starting out to color correct and you're shooting log footage, you can really use a LUT. A LUT can get you pretty close, and a LUT can certainly help you out. So this shot, let me just delete this node. That came out of the camera, and I'm going to show you guys what I color corrected it to. This is what I turned it into. This is the shot that actually aired. Now, it's very contrasty and very dark, and because it's dark and contrasty, the background, which was bright, is kind of glowy, which is exactly the look we were going for. And as you can see, there's lots of little nodes in here where I retouched people's skin, relit people's faces, relit people's dresses. I relit Gene's suit somewhere. You can do a lot more if you don't have a LUT on when you color correct this footage. So I hope this helped you guys out, and I hope this cleared up a little bit what is log footage. Now, there are two main ways that recording logarithmically can affect your footage. The first is color. You can record a lot more color, and this one's a little harder to understand, which is why I did it first. The second way log can affect your recordings is dynamic range. That's what the next video is going to be about. That is a lot easier to see, and it's also a lot easier to explain. So I hope this helped you guys, and happy correcting, everybody.